Welcome back to Listen Up Podcast at Grace Christian University.
Hello, today we have a great guest. We have Tallon Palmateer. He's a student here at Grace. Thanks for being on the show, Tallon.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
So, Tallon, for our listeners and viewers, what are you studying here at Grace and what year are you?
I'm a sophomore and I'm studying biblical studies.
Awesome. So we're just going to dive a little bit deep into your life, ask some questions pertaining to maybe some of your passions and stuff like that, and we'll just see where it goes. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so tell me a bit about this year. How has your sophomore year at Grace been so far?
I think it's been pretty good. I've enjoyed it. I like living at the Walker house with everybody. I think soccer season went well, so that was an enjoyable experience to have. We got to go down to Florida again and play. In terms of my classes, I really enjoyed my classes this year as well. Like right now, I have philosophy and culture with Lovren, so that's always interesting. And I have Greek with Kyle, so that's always intriguing to do. It's a little frustrating sometimes, but we make it work. So, but yeah, I've actually really enjoyed this year overall.
Cool. So freshman year, you lived in the dorms, and then you moved to the house. What was the best thing about moving to a house, and what was the, I won't say worst, but I will say most trying thing about moving to a house?
Well, the best thing is that, for me at least, you get like more of a kitchen, you get an oven. So I learned how to cook on an oven this year, so that's impressive for me. But well, the hardest thing is like actually like cleaning the living space, because in a dorm it's like, well, you got this square room here and that's all you got to keep track of. But it's like now you got to keep track of a whole house, so you got to remind people to clean or remind yourself to clean. But living in a house is a lot better than dorms if you can do that, or even the apartments. Preston Hall has its perks, but it's time to move on after freshman year.
Please tell me what those perks are. Just kidding. Just kidding. There are perks. Okay, cool. So remind me again what you're studying.
I'm a biblical studies major.
Biblical studies. So what do you seek to specialize in with your biblical studies?
Well, once I graduate, I'll have to go on to seminary. And then from there, I mean, if I could go into a PhD program, that'd be cool, but I'm not focused on that exactly. But I want to be able to teach as a professor ideally. So if I can, after master's, teach undergraduate somewhere and then work towards a PhD, that'd be pretty cool.
That is really cool. So, so you're really into theology and biblical study and things like that. What would you say you prefer more of, like the history side of things, or like the theology and the knowledge of it?
I'd say for me, it's more the theology of it. I do like learning about historical theologians and sort of historical theology, but for me, it's more like, what does the Bible actually tend to teach, and what do I believe, and then how I can believe more of what the Bible actually teaches, not just, my own doctrines or theology that I was taught growing up, finding like more of an authentic faith and belief.
Yeah. So you just said kind of the theology or the belief that you grew up believing. This brings the question, how has that belief or your how has your belief kind of changed or matured since growing up in the church you did and where you are now at Grace?
Well, I mean, my church set me up pretty well, I think, for most things, but I've gone on my own journey for theology and stuff a lot in my own different ways, and just trying to figure out how to explain things to myself, because I'm like, well, I don't understand this. How does this work? And just asking general questions and going about that. So that's taken me down different avenues. I mean, I'm a very big Genesis guy, so I like talking about that stuff. So creation is an interest of mine, and I like the Old Testament broadly. So like there's things where I've had to research and study that might have differed from what I thought growing up or the people around me thought, but I think is the most biblical idea. So you kind of got to go with that, even if it's not always with the crowd,
100%. So I would love to dive deeper into that, but before we do that, tell me a little bit about, your life, how you grew up, your childhood, what growing up in the church or your school was like that kind of brought you to where you are now as an individual.
Well, I grew up in Port Huron. I had both parents in the household, so it was pretty good. Um, for up until my junior year, I went to a private Christian school, so that's where I got part of my interest because you're kind of forced to take a class every
Mm-hmm.
semester on it. But I always thought it was enjoyable. But for me, it wasn't until like my junior year, kind of sophomore year, a little bit, that I really got into it. And that even though I didn't know I wanted to do that like as a study in college and stuff, it was like I really got interested in the topic because I went through like sort of my own crisis of faith where I had thought about a lot, but I didn't know how everything lined up. So it forced me to really take a deeper look at things. And I think that doubt benefited me because it led me to have a stronger relationship because there is truth in Christianity and it is there, even if, you might not see it at first, or if you're just wrong about something, and you have to be honest enough to change your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, growing up, had a good childhood. Everything went pretty well. Everyone has hardships and stuff, but it was good.
So out of those hardships that you faced as a child, which of those would you say was the most forming for you or maturing?
Well, I mean, growing up, I don't know how else to put it. I was kind of chunky. I was a little chubby.
Mm-hmm.
And like when I was younger, it didn't really bother me, but as I grew up, it started to bother me more. So I went through a summer where I played like basketball every day and some soccer, but I would run a lot too. And I lost like 15, 20 pounds in the summer.
Wow.
And so for me, that taught me a lot of discipline. I would have been seventh grade going into eighth grade. That taught me a lot of discipline, and it really showed me what hard work can do. And so from that, I was able to really apply that in other areas of my life. So I think sort of going about skinnying up a little bit really was character growth for me.
And I like to think that you've done a good job keeping it off and, and
Yeah.
remaining that. So when you started playing soccer there, was that the first time you played soccer, or did you grow up before playing, or
I had started playing soccer when I was 3.
okay.
So I've been playing since, and I played in high school and all throughout that. Growing up, for the most part, I actually like basketball more, but as I got into later high schoolers, like, yeah, no, soccer is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I started to focus on that more.
Gotcha. Yeah, the further you go with basketball, for the most part, unless you're like Steve Nash, it's kind of relying on height.
Yeah, 5'8" doesn't really do it most of the time, so.
No. Nate Robinson did at 5'9", but then again, it's Nate Robinson. So.
Big difference between him and I.
Yeah. So when did you first believe in Jesus?
Well, as a kid growing up, obviously you accept Christ, but I don't think as a little kid you really know what that means. And through like early middle school, I'd say that I did believe, but I don't think I really knew what it was to live out your faith or what that really meant. So I think it was around sophomore year, junior year, where I would have believed before and I would have said so and whatnot. I don't think I truly understood it until around that time, what it really meant to live out your faith and how to actually live for Christ, not just, not do certain things and have God in the back of your mind. You know what I mean? Like really try to bring him to the forefront and put him first in what you do.
So between that time of being a kid and then going into high school, before you went through, those doubts that later really grew your faith, what was that transition like?
From middle school to high school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was still at the Christian school, so that was K through 12. So it really was just
Wow.
like moving down the hall for lockers,
Okay.
I already knew everyone and everything. So it wasn't that, for me at least, high school wasn't a big transition. It was more of a transition when I transferred to public school. That was a real switch up for me. But I don't know, middle school versus high school, there's a little bit of a difference. I was a little weirder in middle school.
Explain.
Like in the 7th grade, I really liked wombats for some reason.
Oh, interesting.
Like, it wasn't like I was obsessed with the animal. I just thought it was funny to bring him up and say stuff. Like, I was like, if you know me now, I'm still pretty random and I'll just say random things, but like not that far. So it's like it's toned in a little bit. But once I got into high school more, it was like, I don't know, my interests and my passions became more communicatable with other people.
Hmm.
Like in middle school, it often felt like I was interested in things that other people weren't, or that I couldn't talk about it as much. So it was like once I hit high school, it started to mature and I could communicate it more, and like it allowed people to know me better, I think.
Hmm. So during that time in high school where you are forming new beliefs through your own study, that you kind of prodded on yourself, were there mentors around you who were pouring into you, or what did that look like?
Um, a lot of in high school, it was basically by myself. One person who I remember pretty fondly is my middle school Bible teacher, Mrs. Lane.
Hmm.
She's the one who got me really into the Old Testament, because 7th and 8th grade, it was just straight Old Testament for like 4 semesters.
Wow.
But it was, which gives you good background for that stuff. You remember little things, but like, I don't know, it really made me interested in the Old Testament and stuff. So I really value that. In terms of mentors, you have teachers that kind of
Mhm.
guide you and whatnot. Like I'd ask her questions as well, and she'd tell me things and introduce me to new ideas. So, but a lot of it was just on my own study too, and whatever, because some of it was like, do I really want to even say the doubt? Like, you know what I mean? So it's like I
Mhm.
just keep it to myself and go research it myself. But which
Mhm.
isn't always the most helpful. You should be able to go to people and talk, but
Mhm.
you know what I mean? It's kind of just how it was then, I feel like, for myself. So, but I had some good mentors, specifically Mrs. Lane. So
Shout out to
shout
Mrs.
out to
Lane.
Mrs. Lane. But yeah, I'd say it was pretty good.
So in high school, where you continued to develop um, kind of an idea of what you would like to go into, what made Bible college the next reasonable decision above other possible choices, and how did you find Grace?
Um, well, going into high school, I remember like sophomore year, I wanted to be a psychologist,
Hmm.
and then I was like, actually, I just like watching Peterson videos on
Oh,
YouTube. So it
yeah.
was like maybe not exactly psychologist, but I do like watching him. So it was like
Mhm.
then for a while, even leading into college, I was unsure whether I wanted to do political science or not, because I do like politics and talking about that stuff. But I think for me, like obviously coming to Grace, there's no political science, so it was like I knew I wanted to do biblical studies, and so it kind of was like one of those things where it's like, yeah, let's pursue this, focus this, and not have other things, because there's always that thought in the back of your mind, like you could help on a campaign trail, but it's like if your callings are elsewhere, you want to go there too. For
Mhm.
Grace particularly, I was looking at colleges and emailing coaches for soccer, and so I was on a website and just Grace Christian University was there. So I filled it out, and it ended up working for pricing and location. And I came visited here, and I was like, I like the small environment, because
Mhm.
it sort of reminded me of the Christian school, because it's smaller. And then you go to
Mhm.
public school, you're like, everything's so large, and you get used to that. But it's like, it's nice coming to more like an environment where you know people and you can relate to people more closely.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess that's how I found Grace, basically just on the internet.
Cool. What would you say is your favorite part, or favorite part of the experience of being at Grace?
Um, I mean, obviously, I like hanging out with my friends and doing that kind of stuff. But for me, one of the benefits I see is being able to interact with my professors and ask
Mhm.
them different questions, whether it's just emailing them or seeing them in person or whatever.
Mhm.
So, like, it's always enjoyable to me to talk to P Long and ask him a question about something, or ask a philosophy question to Lover, and just like having people, like having those resources around you to where
Mhm.
it's like you can pull wisdom from them, or they can teach you things. And like even Jake Rogers introduced me to a lot of new ideas last semester. So it's like I really enjoy just engaging with the professors and just figuring out, like, because there's a lot I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's like I want to know what it is. So it's like the more you interact with them, the more you can figure out. So it's always
Mhm.
useful.
Which which class that you've had so far sticks out to you as this class changed me in these ways, and why?
I think my Acts class I had last year with Pelong was good because I think it showed me like a lot more in my face because it's like one book for the whole semester. It showed me like just the complexity that is like in studying a book of the New Testament, because oftentimes you're like, oh, well, it's just the Acts of the Apostles, but it's like, no, there's a narrative structure. There's a reason why, like, there's build up to Paul's conversion and how it's foreshadowed in the text. There's a reason why the Ethiopian eunuch shows up in chapter 8 and Cornelius shows up in chapter 10, but he's the first God-fearer to convert to, well, what we know as Christianity, but would be just a follower of Jesus. And so it's like, for me, it was like there was such thematic detail and reason behind everything that happened. It really brought richness to my understanding of the text. And it was just like everything's put together for a reason. It's not like the author, or it wasn't like Luke was basically like, we'll stick it here. It's like, no. There's a reason and there's a purpose to it. And it really makes me want to know why, or at least the theology behind it,
So you desiring to know why and dig deep and know those thematic details that are unique to a certain text. You mentioned earlier that you love Genesis and studying it. What intrigues you most about Genesis, and what do you think the majority of people get wrong about the book?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, Genesis 1 through 11 is always the most interesting because it's sort of like proto-history or mytho-history. And that doesn't mean that it didn't actually happen or anything, mind you. But for me, we often try to place the text in our own cultural context as opposed to the ancient context that it was written in for the ancient culture. And so for me, it's sort of uncovering what the ancient culture would have thought about the text and how they would have interpreted it. And so, that affects how you think about the Nephilim, the sons of God in Genesis 6, were they human, were they divine? And especially even Genesis 1 with creation, because we always one fundamental difference I'd say, and this is controversial, so people can disagree with me, but we often look at the text and assume that it's speaking material creation, because for us that seems so normal, so necessary. But in the ancient cultural context, oftentimes the culture wasn't concerned about material creation. It was concerned about what function the creation actually had. So for the ancient culture, it was as if something didn't exist if it didn't have a function. They just assumed material creation happened at some time in the past. That wasn't really their concern. So when you look at the text, and there's a lot more details to it, and people can disagree with me. When you look at the text, it's like, for me, Genesis 1 is showing that God is creating function to the universe and creating order out of pre-existing chaos, as opposed to just, oh, well, this is him materially creating everything. And it's like, for us, it's so easy to assume material creation, but like to the ancient culture, they might not be thinking in that sort of paradigm. So it becomes important to study as best we can, like ancient cultures and what they would have thought about that, because it informs our knowledge of the text,
So, along with that view of creation, I've actually never heard that before, which is really inspiring because now I want to learn more about and study more about that. What are your thoughts about people trying to categorize, the days of creation into 7-day period? Was it thousands of years? Is it poetic? What are your thoughts?
At one point, I was in the day age theory camp, so that would be that each day is actually just a long finite period of time, which would be based on the Hebrew word for day, which is yom. And I don't stand in that camp anymore because overwhelmingly the Hebrew word for day is used for a 24-hour period. And so what I would say is that it is talking about creation in 24-hour periods, but it's not God materially creating in those 24 hours. It's him producing function to pre-existing materials within those 24-hour days. And so it is a little bit of a perspective shift, but I think there's a lot of evidence behind it. The particular view of Genesis I tend to hold, of Genesis 1, is the temple inauguration view. And John Walton promotes it in The Lost World of Genesis 1. And, there's other scholars, but it basically shows that Genesis 1 is sort of a temple building creation. So it's like it's viewing the world as building his temple. And that's why on the seventh day he rests, because where does God rest? He rests in his temple. shows that his creation was complete and fully functional. And so for me, it's like the days are 24-hour days, but it's just not speaking about material creation. It's talking about a functional creation. And it's speaking of it in terms of establishing his temple, which would be, the cosmos, the world.
Wow. It's so poetic when you think about it like that, just so romantic, where it's, God wanted to be present with us and share that communion with us. And the fact that like what you mentioned, creating the world, building up his temple, that's just really cool. It kind of brings a little bit of emotion thinking about it. So that's really cool. So other than Genesis, what about the Old Testament really intrigues you?
Well, right now particularly, I'm concerned, or not concerned, that's the wrong word. I'm interested in sort of the composition of the Pentateuch. I have a book right now called Exploring the Composition of the Pentateuch that I'm going through, or I need to start reading more, but I've read the first chapter. But for me, because it's like growing up, you're always told, oh, well, Moses wrote the Pentateuch. It's like, probably didn't. It's a little more complex than that. And so for me, it's like, well, what does that mean? And so, like, for example, Rogers, he introduced me to the documentary hypothesis, which is basically that there's 4 sources. There's the J source, the E source, the D source, and the P source. And that originate different times. And there's all sorts of arguments for the times. It's really wild, but that the Deuteronomic author or authors would have pulled from when compiling the text and editing the text into the final form we see today. So there's that, but the documentary hypothesis is sort of dying off, is sort of falling back a little bit. So it opens up new scholarship though. And so that's what I find interesting, because it's like, well, how was the Pentateuch compiled? Because some of it probably did originate around the time of Moses, whether from oral tradition or quite ancient, but it's like it developed over time into where we find it today. And so for me, it's interesting to figure out, like, how did the text get to where it is? And like I was talking to Pelong about this earlier, actually, and he basically said that, like, while that is interesting to do, it's not always necessary. You can just say the text is here how it is now, and let's focus on it now, which is useful and has its place. But it's also, if you can study the composition and try to figure it out, I think you should, because it informs us about how the text was written and how it was added to or edited over time. So for me, the composition of the Pentateuch right now is interesting to me.
So recently, over the past couple of years, there have been some pastors like Andy Stanley who maybe dismiss the Old Testament to a certain degree or don't see its relevance for today. How do you think the Old Testament should relate to today, and how should we view it in light of the New Testament?
Yeah. I don't know a lot about Andy Stanley, but I remember I saw a clip where he was talking about we need to detach the New Testament from the Old Testament. It gets me riled up, you know what I mean? Because it's like you can't understand the New Testament without the Old Testament. You can't understand who Jesus is and why he needed to do what he did without the context from the Old Testament, And so obviously we understand the Old Testament now in light of the New Testament, but the Old Testament informs how we should even think about the New Testament and why it matters as much as it does, because it's like, well, why did Jesus have to come and die? If you don't have the context from the Old Testament, you don't even know about sin. You don't even know about any of these concepts or why he needed to be a sacrifice for us, sort of that penal substitution. So for me, it's like, it's very harmful to Christianity to make a claim that we need to detach from the Old Testament, or as if we need to downsize it. It's like the New Testament has a big place and it's valid, you know what I mean? But it's like if you don't bring in the Old Testament, you're missing 70% of the Bible, so it's like you really want to remove that big of a chunk. Like, even if some of it doesn't apply to us today, it's necessary to learn, or it's good to learn, because it informs how we think about later things and later texts, So for me, it's like you can't have the New Testament without the Old Testament. And you need a very big emphasis on the Old Testament to inform how we think about the New Testament.
That's good. Yeah, it's true. What would you say is, for modern churches, I'll say popular Christianity, What about their theology in relation to your understanding of the text and their use of the text is incorrect or needs to be changed?
I think, at least in my experience, we oftentimes we take the text and we just try to apply it to our own lives. And while that is necessary, that is something you need to do with application. I think, like, I've seen it sometimes where it's like, you take a verse out of context and try to support it with something in your own life, and it's like the context doesn't really fit here. So for me, it's just like, it's not wrong to study the text and learn what it means just for the sake of learning what it means and what it meant in its original context. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you can definitely apply things to your own life, but I would just say be cautious when you do, because there are things that very easily apply to us, and then there are other things that you would stretch the text in order to do. And so I would just be careful about application and not taking the text out of context.
What are some of those things that people tend to stretch?
I mean, like, people take popular verses like I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You put it on your basketball shoe,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, I can make this basket. It's like, God sustains you. He obviously does that, but this text probably is not referring to you playing basketball. Or it's good that you can draw from it, but it's like there's some context to it. Paul's probably talking about suffering Christians and persecution and whatnot. So there's other verses we can probably use than that one to apply to our own lives. But that would be a popular one from the New Testament. Obviously, in the Old Testament, you have Jeremiah 29:11. Yep. I have plans for you. It's like, yeah, you got plans for me. It's like he does, but he's talking about Israel here.
Yeah.
So let's remember that.
Yeah, there's other verses in the Old Testament that would speak clear to having plans. In Psalm 139. Every day is written in your book before one comes to be. That sure sounds like plans to me.
Yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't have the word prosper.
Yeah,
and Americans love the word prosper.
It's right in the name, prosperity gospel.
Yep, exactly. So talking about, I should say, modern Christianity or Christianity today, who are some individuals that you look up to? Even maybe like closer in age to you than not as well, maybe younger on the scale that you look up to. It can be old too, don't worry.
So for modern day, I'd say, like, in terms of scholars, it'd be like Michael Heiser. Okay. His book The Unseen Realm is really good. John Walton. I like N.T. Wright. I don't want to forget anybody. Yeah, and then I know I'm forgetting things, but I like, in terms of people I know, I like talking to Bryce about things.
Oh, cool.
I like talking to Matt about things, and I like to engage with them because they have their own thoughts and their own ideas, and that's always cool to talk about and discuss, because we agree on a lot of things, but we don't agree on everything. So it creates an interesting dynamic.
And it's good that you don't agree on everything, right? Because it helps you to grow, right?
Yeah.
And it's great that you can have that, what I'm assuming is respectful dialogue with each other and grow, because I think that's something that the world is lacking now, is that respectful discourse, even if they don't agree. Cool. So just one last question. So for students in school, or maybe young Christians right now, young adults, what is something that you're learning that you would like to, and it could be learning about God, learning about theology, what's something that you'd like to let them know about?
I just let them know that it's okay to have doubts, and it's okay to have questions, and you shouldn't feel ashamed to ask them, or you shouldn't feel shame that you're thinking, about things critically, and that it's leading you down a different path than you might originally have thought. And so I would just encourage them to, go to people in their lives who they trust and talk about these things, but also do their own research and their own study, and be humble enough to accept that they're probably wrong about some things and that they need to learn and need to grow. So there's a lot of information out there, but they should go at it boldly and unashamed, and that the information they find, it's okay, even if you don't know how to process it at the time. And there is truth in Christianity, and well, the truth is in Christianity. Let's make it clear. But, and, through like apologetics, you can find those answers you're looking for, and it should lead you right back to Christ. Even if immediately it might lead you and it looks like a different rabbit trail, it should shoehorn you back in, whether it's with the resurrection of Christ and arguments for the resurrection, whether it's arguments for the existence of God, or whatever questions you have. I would just say, just go at it full-heartedly and just be open to what you find.
So that was going to be the last question, but to go off of that, what area of your faith did you have the most doubt about, and what changed that for you?
Well, for me, when I was having doubts, it was, I'd say broadly just the existence of God. I think that's pretty generic, but I think that was there. So you start looking into arguments and what people are saying, that kind of thing. But for me particularly, it was creation and how it functioned, because I, tended to grow up young earth creationist, and that was all that I knew. And so when that seemed to fall apart for me, it seemed like it was that or just not being a Christian, And so that, I think that's a harmful mindset. And so it took me humbling myself and realizing that I'm probably wrong about things, and leading me into new perspectives on Genesis and the text that, led me closer to God in the long run, and I think is more biblically accurate.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. It was a great conversation. I'm looking forward to listening back to it while I edit it.
Yeah.
Don't worry, all your good stuff will remain. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And this is our last interview of the semester. So thank you for listening.